Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader. Today, our guest is Stephanie Scott, author of What's Left of Me Is Yours, her first novel, published in June by Doubleday. Parenthetically, an early draft of the manuscript won the A.M. Heath Prize, the Gerwood Arvon Prize for prose fiction, and was runner-up in the Bridport Prize Peggy Chapman Andrews Award. And the Observer selected it as one of the 10 best new voices of 2020. So, we all strive to do our best in life. We find ourselves in positions where we must summon all of our strength to remain masters of our fate, assuming we ever know exactly what that is. And notwithstanding that very lofty credo, we find ourselves in a world where we really can't change that fate, just as we can't step in the same river twice. So, wakaresaseya is a technique of sorts by which in Japan, which is a fault divorce country, not no fault as it is in much of the USA, a husband or wife can establish grounds for divorce by hiring a man or a woman to conduct an affair with a spouse so that the person interested in obtaining a divorce can establish grounds to do so. But what if the person hired fails his task by falling in love with his purported victim, if you will? And even though other reviews may have telegraphed kind of what the upshot of all this is, I tend to try not to spoil things. So I'll leave it to Stephanie to tell us as much as she feels comfortable with. So hi, Stephanie. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Sam. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So as I said earlier when we spoke briefly, I own an independent bookstore. So, and I've said this a lot. So as many times as people tell me you can't judge a book by its cover, everybody who comes into my bookstore judges the book by its cover. So I always talk about that first because your cover is beautiful. And I was wondering whether you got a chance to vet it or, look at different iterations.
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely. I was very involved. I'm actually wondering, should I get a copy?
Oh, yeah. Because, I just have the net.
2 seconds. Sorry, I should have been more organized about that.
That's good.
This is the novel. This is What's Left of Me Is Yours, and this is the cover that we're talking about. So this cover, I was very, very involved in how it came about. It's actually a self-portrait of the Japanese photographer Miki Takahashi, who I admire enormously, and I love her work, particularly her double exposure photographs. And in this one, as you can see, it's a picture of her as well as an exposure of the flowers. And here she actually looks very much like my character, Rina, in the novel, so much so, even down to like the dyed tips of her hair, that it was uncanny. So I was delighted when Miki gave us permission to use the photograph.
And it has that bit of sadness. It also has a certain kind of resolve. I don't know if that's the right word. Yeah, but it does have that. And the other thing is the epigraphs, which the person who potentially is going to buy the book, that's also the first thing they look at, other than the fact that they want to see whether they're getting a first edition, first printing. So the epigraph is one of the most famous poems in English literature, Invictus, which is evoked at sporting events like Chicago Games. And I thought it was interesting. I'll read it. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And this guy, William Henley, he was a good poet, but this was what he was remembered for. And this section of the poem is the most poignant and the one that lets you build yourself up to a certain resolve to go out there and win. And so I always know that authors spend a lot of time. You must have spent a lot of time choosing this as your epigraph. And I wondered why you didn't, later on, there's a semi-epigraph that's in Japanese. But why would you choose an old English poem as the epigraph of this novel?
That's a very, very good question. And as you say, I was really drawn towards using Mishima or Basho as the first epigraph. And I'm very glad that you described the Mishima quote as the second epigraph, because it really very much is. They are both very, very important. But I think the reason I chose to go with this is because it was so pushy when I was thinking about the novel, when I was writing about it. And I think what this poem really speaks about is the human spirit. And it's particularly timely and relevant today, where, the world has gone crazy and everyone is feeling quite embattled. And it's really about overcoming the challenges and the harshness of life. And I thought that was really spoke to the human spirit and the sort of universality of the themes. I also thought that the self-determination is such an important concept within the novel, and it really speaks for all of my characters, for every single one of them. What the choices they make govern their lives, and how they deal with the outcomes, their responsibilities, basically how they choose to live, and how that power is within all of them, whether they like the final outcome or not. And I think because it was so central to all of my characters in spirit, I chose it as the epigraph.
It's interesting because the Mishima quote juxtaposes it in such a way that, kind of like I said, another Buddhist kind of thing, that you can't step in the river twice because it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
It almost seems as if they kind of, no pun intended, bookend each other.
Yes.
Okay, no matter what happens, I'm going to do what I set out to do, versus things are unchangeable, but at the same time, they're constantly being transformed.
Yes.
So you're kind of at sea. I want to do what I want to do, but it's just, I'm not sure where I am.
Yes. Well, yes, absolutely. And I think it also speaks of people and situations, and the reiterations of life. I think life cycles of human behavior. We always seem to be doing the same things every few decades, every century or so. History is always repeating itself. And so I really liked that idea of how some things don't change, but then they are constantly being transformed by new generations, new people, new ideas.
Or like Sumi, you're living your life, everything is fine, and then you get a phone call.
Yes. And exactly how new information, how I think Mishima says it's knowledge that transforms the world, how new information and knowledge can suddenly change everything, that you thought you knew, everything you believed, all of the things that are important to you are suddenly cast in this totally different light. So I was really fascinated by that. And by the way, I'm so thrilled that you've asked me about the epigraphs, because no one else has, and they're so important. Thank you.
I know, it's like, it seems logical, because I think it's something, okay, you either write the book and then you spend a lot of time thinking and looking through quotations, or the epigraph comes first, which propels the book. And usually it's after you've written the book and you search. But
these two were there from the very beginning, and extremely dominant. Yeah, they were very, very dominant.
That's really cool.
really pushy.
The other thing that kind of, okay, here's a third thing that kind of messes with your head, is that there are lies. And you talk about the kind of lies that when they begin, they're kind of this gossamer, wispy thing. But then the other side of it is that the best lies are the ones that are closest to the truth. And I remember when I was a kid, I did something and I lied to my father. And he said to me two things: I don't care what you do, just don't lie to me. And the other thing is, he says, if you start lying, you won't be able to sleep at night. And my father said all kinds of cool things, but those are things that I really tried, again, like the epigraph, I tried to live my life along those lines. And so, the book is structured on several different, and well, you know what? Here's what I do every time. As an interviewer, I really like the book, so I ask you questions, but I realize, just like now, that the potential readers have no idea what I'm talking about. And so, just like in most interviews, you probably have this canned now. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the book? Sorry.
Of course. No. My pleasure. Well, as you said, it revolves around the wakaresaseya, the Japanese marriage breakup industry, which is a real industry in Japan. And the novel was inspired by a true crime that occurred in 2010, where a marriage breakup agent fell in love with his target. And I think I've departed a great deal from that crime, and I've moved part of the narratives into the 80s and 90s and also the present day, and I've changed a great deal. But what really fascinated me about that case was that the wakaresaseya agent he fell in love with his target, and when she tried to leave him, he killed her. And when he was confessing to the detectives, he said, but I loved her, and I love her still. I couldn't live without her. And this poor woman had found out the reality of his profession and the role he'd played in the breakdown of her marriage, and she tried to leave him. And at that point, he'd strangled her. And this was the idea that inspired the novel, my novel, which is both a why-done-it, but also a who-done-it. So I'm not really spoiling anything and telling you the premise here. But what happens in my novel is that there is a young woman, Sumiko, who is a newly qualified lawyer, and she grows up never truly knowing how her mother died. She believes it's a car crash, but then one day she receives a call from the prison service, and she effectively goes in search of the truth for what happened. So the novel is dual narrative. We have Sumiko in the present searching for what happened to her mother, and then we have Rina and Kaitarō in the past, and that is really the love story. And I was fascinated by this idea of love when I first read the case. That Tolstoy's idea, I think, that there are perhaps as many different kinds of love as there are people. Because when I first read that this man had said that he'd loved her and killed her, I wondered if that could possibly be true, because love in its ideal form is selfless. Then I started thinking about all of the different kinds of love that exist, and then how love is individual to each person, how our survival can hinge on another person. And so how we love and what we will do to was really where the novel began.
Yeah, I'm just writing down some notes. I'm not looking away from you, so I don't forget. But one thing I thought about was, it was interesting how, like, let's see, I wrote it down, how you include Kafka in the trial, you include Sartre, and I thought it's interesting. I know you did so much research for the book, but it's interesting that you quote these Western people. And then Kafka, I loved the book, and it is kind of a situation in which, not that you may have not meant it, she just happens to be reading it. It's offhanded. But
yes.
But at the same time, it does affect your understanding of the book, because there's this idea of a trial, in a certain sense.
Yes.
But you don't really know what the charges are until the very end.
Yes, until the end. And I think what I wanted to do in that, I mean, I'm quite obsessed with the trial, and I must say the trial was also a very pushy part of this novel. It really demanded to be in it. And I think one of the reasons is that Kafka trained as a lawyer, and he's very, very good at looking at these systems that are man-made. As men, we're fallible, and so are the systems we create. And I love how he looks at how crazy they are, and I also wanted to explore how they are fallible and how they can entrap us. How they don't necessarily do what we would like them to do, or they don't necessarily act as they are designed. And there's an author in the UK called The Secret Barrister who also looks at the inadequacy of the law in this way. And what I also found very, very interesting is that Japanese law is, particularly after the American occupation and the Second World War, is in itself a very international hybrid system. So there are parts of Japanese law that are based on French and German law. There's a great deal of American law. There's indigenous Japanese and Chinese characteristics in there. So just as the novel is very international in its outlook, very universal in its themes, so Japanese law is also that way. And I found that very interesting, the systems that we have constructed to govern ourselves and how they can fail us.
I never know whether to hate Max Brod or to love Max Brod, because he promised Kafka that he would destroy everything. Then he didn't, but we wouldn't have any of it. Plus, he kind of semi-finished the trial too, So I never have these mixed feelings about him. Not that that has anything to do with selling your book. But the other thing I did want to talk about was this idea of passion versus possession. And you're too young, but I've been in a situation, or more than one situations, where I felt that. And maybe the possession is kind of this codependency kind of thing sometimes. But there really is a difference. And that is also very pivotal and extremely pivotal in this book.
Well, yes, I think the question of, what is love and can you love someone and kill them is critical to the novel. And, is it love or is it possession? Is it selfishness? Is it greed? What is it? What are these emotions and what do they mean to us? I think that's really at the center of the book. But you were talking about how there's a very sort of international range of literary influences. I think Sartre in particular is very important in Japan, but Kafka also. And when I was in Japan, I did some talks at schools in Tokyo, and I was talking to them about my anthropological work, and they would always take me to the library afterwards, and the children would bring me the books that they were reading and that they really loved. And Sartre would come up, Kafka would come up, and actually Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights would come up a lot. And we would talk about Mishima, we would talk about Basho. They would ask me who my favorite Japanese authors were, and we would talk in detail about that. But the books that they were bringing me were international, and they spoke very passionately about them. And I thought that really stuck with me. It really stayed with me.
Yeah.
How that outlook. So that's why there's such a range.
It's kind of like Kurosawa here.
Yes.
And all the westerns that have been made out of that.
Absolutely. And of course, my prosecutor in the novel is called Kurosawa. So Rashomon was pivotal to the novel, and really key, that interrogation of justice and what is the truth and the fallibility of eyewitnesses. That was all extremely key to this novel and how it came about. So, yes.
You know what? Normally there's like one pivot point, but when she goes to her house, that's another because she doesn't want to give it to her, but
no,
she does. And the thing about it is Sumi's memory, like her memory is very interesting because she remembers how she was held and cradled by her, but she has so many memories of her mother.
Yes.
That are very poignant. And you're thinking, well, would I remember that of my mom if something happened? And then I thought about it, and yes, I would. When I was like 4 years old.
Yeah, I thought about that a lot. I'm an only child, and so my mother is actually the most important person in my life. And when I was writing this novel, she became seriously ill, and we thought for a time that we would lose her. And touch wood, thankfully, she's fine and she's with us. But I started to think about what you would remember, and all that would be gone if she left us, but also what I would have missed out on if I hadn't had her. She's such an important person in my life. I think I owe so much to her. I owe my love of literature to her. So I started to think about, the role of mothers in our lives. And I do think Sumiko would remember, she does remember a deal about her mother, even though she's only 7, but I think you would.
My mom died last year. She was 97.
Oh my goodness.
No, it was a wonderful, wonderful death. And I wouldn't want her in her nursing home during COVID because she wouldn't be able to see her 3 sons every day, and she would just check out. She's like that. She would have just. But we built this library, and it's named after her. And yesterday I went to do early voting, which I don't want to talk about politics.
Okay.
But I went to her library, and there's her big picture. And I don't know why I did this. I walked in, and I went, "Hi, Mom." She, in a sense, she's no longer here, but she's.
Oh, she is.
Yeah, I know.
She is, of course, definitely. I completely understand that. My family are from Singapore, and I lost my grandmother recently, and I still think she's with me all the time. Other people probably think I'm a bit nuts, but I don't think she's here, and I have her picture, and I talk to it.
Yeah, it seems reasonable to me. Isn't it interesting how like old friends or people you knew when you were a kid, they could have died, but they're still alive because you haven't gotten a phone call saying they died. So
yes,
they're still alive. I mean,
yes, and how people exist within other people and within memory. You asked about photography actually, and why I'd used it as a medium when we were talking earlier, and the Japanese words for memory and document are kyoku and kiroku, and they're so similar that only one sound divides them. And so this idea of memory and documentation, it's really encapsulated by photography because it's a place where physical memory and the human spirit can combine. And I really loved that aspect of it. I think that's why I partially chose to center so much of the novel around photography. And also the very interesting thing is that many Japanese photographers write very beautifully and very emotionally about their personal lives, far more so than I've encountered with, say, Western photographers. It was extraordinary as I went through the writings of several Japanese photographers, the kinds of things that they would talk about, and there was an incredible intimacy in their texts and in their photographs, and it sort of threw new light on those photographs, and so that was another thing that fascinated me.
And between Kaitarō and Sumi, that was a big part of their relationship. It's funny too because I used to have a Canon T90.
Did you?
Yeah, until I switched to a Canon AE1, but that was a really good camera. And as soon as I saw that, I went, well, yeah, okay, I can understand now. But going back on point, once again, I end up talking about myself. No, it's me. I end up talking about myself. No one wants to hear what I'm doing. The idea of love, we were talking about possession and all that. And one of the reviewers of the book talked about, there's a love of a father, there's a love of a grandfather, a mother to a daughter back to a mother. And so that really also gives rise to, gives rise to this whole book. And it does, because once you find out about something, about someone you love, it's really hard. And from personal experience, I know this, it's really hard to let go of it. It's like your research.
Yeah.
It's like going down a rabbit hole. You have to get to the end. It's like you really have to do it. And that's how she felt.
Yes. I'm glad. I really wanted the narrative to have a real drive, a real force to get to the end. So I'm glad that comes across.
Oh, definitely. The only thing that irritated me is that when I look at the table of contents and I see that we're going to go from person to person, I go, but what if I like one person a lot and then I have to switch and then I got to wait till she comes back again? But that didn't happen here because they were all equally entrancing.
I'm so glad, because that stressed me out a great deal when I was writing the book. You're absolutely right. When there are competing narratives, there's always going to be a favorite narrative. And, what do you do? So I spent so much time editing and refining. I was like, you all have to be interesting. All of you. Some
of my customers, they'll skim the part with the character they don't like. And I hate the concept of skimming. I get angry at them. You either read it,
you can't.
Yeah. It's there's no aspect of this book that I would consider magical realism, but the only time I thought that something came close was when Kaitarō looks at her picture for the first time and he thinks, a life cut short.
Yeah.
I'm going, okay, that's, it's like that saying about if you see a gun in act 1 of a play, it has to be fired by act 5. And
yes.
It's like that. It's like, okay, I know that it's going to happen. Why did you choose to do that?
Well, I chose to do it for that reason. There was foreshadowing of what happens to her, but also going back to why photography is such a great medium in fiction. The photo that he's looking at is a self-portrait by Rina when which she's taken at home, and readers, just so you know, Rina was a photographer, and then she married and had to give everything up, and she becomes a housewife, and this leads her into a depression, really, of sorts, where her intellectual life fades away. And this picture is something that she takes alone, in private, in secret, really. And her husband gets hold of it and he hands it to the wakaresaseya agent, Kaitarō. But I think, Rina's life has been cut short in so many different ways up to that point. And it's really her relationship with Kai. He, in many, many ways, in their love story, he brings her back to photography, he brings her back to life. And she brings him back to life in many ways as well. So that sentence also speaks about that.
It's funny. I thought there was only one thing that irritated me, but there's two. The second is she's such a strong woman. So why would she, and she regretted it all her life, why would she give in to this concept of her grandfather or her father pushing her into a relationship that was a planned, marriage?
Well, I think in the novel, she talks about all of the factors that impact on life, and I mean, another reason I chose photography is because it's an art form and not necessarily a particularly lucrative one, and I come from. I come from an Asian family where I was effectively told that I could go into two professions, finance or law, and to choose. My mother said this to me when I was about Sumiko's age, 7. And so, these are the pressures that Rina also feels. And she has to look at how viable following her dream is. Can she support herself financially? Can she do it? Can she pull it off? And in some ways, she's very privileged in that she's been born into a family who love her and they've supported her through university and she's studied law. But she ultimately finds that she can't do it on her own. And I think the pressures of life become so much for her that she gives in and she agrees to this marriage, which will satisfy all her detractors, her family, her friends, society. She'll be seen to be doing the right thing. And in the novel, she says it's a weakness that she will never forgive. But I wanted to explore that, how we can all just have these weak moments where we bow and we do what society wants us to do. Yeah. Inevitably to our detriment.
Yeah, and I like the way she calls it weakness, rather than simply a mistake.
Yeah, no, she's very hard on herself, actually. Yeah, but yeah, she does view it she views it as a weakness.
So why did Yoshi, when he made up the story about her death, why did he blame it on her? Why couldn't he have said the other driver was at fault?
That's a really interesting question that nobody has asked me. I think it was because, so there are a number of reasons. I think it was because he wanted to keep everything very simple. She gives in and she agrees to this marriage, which, did he survive? Would Sumiko go in search of him? Would she ask him? I think he just wants to nip this in the bud and really shut it down. Your mom killed herself whilst driving alone. And I think also because in many ways, in spite of himself, Yoshi does think, he thinks that Rina's actions led to what happened to her. Not that what happened to her is ever excusable, but I think her actions had consequences. He also blames himself tremendously. I think he feels extremely guilty for his role in her death, in her life and her death. And so all of that feeds into this.
How come when they first meet, again going to Western influence, why don't they meet and he asks her to get manju? Why are they talking about cheesecake? It's like New York.
That's actually a nod to the original case. That's how the wakaresaseya and his target met in real life. He, here it's a night market, it's spring, but in real life he met her in a supermarket in the dessert aisle, and he asked her if she could recommend a place for him to find good cheesecake. So there are some small nods from me to the real case, and that's one of them.
He was really good at what he did. The way he walked away and said it was a bad idea.
Yes. I think also he's so conflicted. In the novel, Kaitarō is conflicted. But you're right, actually, in terms of seduction, it's a good do. It makes the reader question, what's going on in this plot. Why does he suddenly leave her? So that it served a lot of purposes, but he's also very conflicted within himself as to whether he can do this job.
Yeah, it's like when Satō calls him in and says, "I've decided I'm going to stay married."
Yeah. Oh yes, the twists and the
I didn't
turns
expect that. I did not expect that at all.
And also the dynamic between the two meet. There's immediately this rivalry, even though Kaitarō tries to be deferential. There's this real tension and inequality between the two men, and I really enjoyed writing that relationship because it's difficult and quite fiery. And I mean, also I hate Satō. I hate the character. He emerged at the beginning of the novel. I knew him very clearly. He emerged fully formed. I knew who he was and why he was doing the things he was doing. But I also hated him.
I was just going to say the exact same words when you said them, because everybody's kind of good in a way.
Yeah, no, everyone else is.
But it's the first moment. Well, the first explanation of staying out late, drinking, smelling like cigarettes. And it's like, ugh, this guy.
Oh God.
Yes. And but once again, this is, I don't know how you can be so young and so good, but this is what propelled it. There's all these things that, like, all these motors or engines behind the boat that's this book, and it's like he propelled the entire thing. Without him, there is no story. If he didn't walk into the office,
what do we do? And he's very much also the put upon salary man, the poor man of the house who works these crazy hours and has to do a lot of after work socializing. And in this way, he's both horrible and sympathetic. And also, I think in terms of what society makes us do and the expectations we have, I think when he marries Rina, he has expectations and she doesn't fulfill them. And so there are reasons why he's dissatisfied. They're just not particularly sympathetic because, as you say, he's an ass.
Yeah.
I tried to soften him. It was really hard.
Well, it's really interesting as a writer when you create someone you really hate.
Yeah. And then you live with them for a long time.
And where does that come from?
Yeah, I know. I don't know where he came from. It's an interesting question. I shall mull on it.
I didn't mean to make you feel bad about it.
No, it's a really good point.
Well, so I guess if you look at it as a love story and about all these different kinds of love in it, well, I guess, in the reviews and other places, it's a love story. It's a thriller. Mm-hmm. Would you call it a tragedy?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Well, I guess because I'm personally quite obsessed with Greek tragedy, ancient Greek tragedy, and particularly Euripides' Electra. And so that has fed in a lot to the story. And again, that social what is the appropriate role of women, Euripides really explores it in Electra. And she has to step out beyond her role in order to avenge her father. And Sumiko is very much an Electra figure here. And so is Rina to an extent, because she will not conform. So I think it is inevitably a tragedy as well. Yeah.
It's so funny about your background, because I just happened to be in Singapore February 5th. And
wow!
I was afraid I couldn't get back.
Oh my God.
And everybody was wearing masks, and it was Chinese New Year. So I didn't realize that going to Singapore for Chinese is like us going to Florida or Hawaii. And it was, such a celebration. And I was enamored with the city, because, I'm thinking, I've been to New York, I've been to Shanghai, I've been to Beijing, and I wasn't expecting Singapore to look like something out of some unimagined future.
Yes, it's very futuristic now.
Was it like that when you were little?
No, it was really different. Singapore is one of those cities, I suppose, like Tokyo in the novel, that is constantly evolving, constantly changing. And, even when I go home now, because all my family is still there and I'm based in London, things have always inevitably changed. It's actually quite hard to find things that are static within the island. And actually, it has such a fantastic history, such a fascinating history, particularly being a Japanese colony during the Second World War. My grandparents were fluent in Japanese due to the occupation. You had to be if you wanted to work and survive, really. And so there's such an interesting history there, and even among some of the old bungalows, most of the city is in high rises now, but there are still some bungalows here and there. And when I was very small, the house I was born in, effectively, it was one of these bungalows, and you can find bits of shrapnel and bullets and, remnants of the Second World War, and, the Japanese and the locals and the British fighting over the island still in the gardens. They're still present. So this fascinates and obsesses me.
Yeah, and it's an amazing story, because when I went to the museum and just walked from picture to picture, and I thought, I had no idea this is how it happened. It was just, It was such a strange story. Well, so having your background and knowing this was a true story, and it's so funny because a lot of Japanese novels, they have that genre where it's a true story, and in the United States it would be libel and slander. But so you read this story, but how did you even find the story, and why did?
That's a good question too. So I read the original article in the Times. It was reported by the Asia editor of the Times, Richard Lloyd Parry, and I just finished reading his incredible book about the murder of Lucy Blackman called People Who Eat Darkness. And I contacted Richard and said I was going to be in Tokyo and would he talk to me about this case. And he was extremely generous and shared all of his articles on the case with me and his view of the wakaresaseya. And I asked what he thought about, I said, I'm thinking of writing a novel about this. What do you think? And he was so encouraging and so positive from the get-go, which was really lovely. In fact, I think he really loved sort of, in those very, very initial early stages, brainstorming ideas with me, because he is a great non-fiction writer, but it's tremendously freeing for him to venture into fiction before you can do anything. And I very much wanted the novel to be fictional. I didn't want to trespass too much into the real case at all, because I suppose my God is fiction. That's where it started.
Yeah, when I was doing my little bit of research about the interview, I didn't realize that this concept of having someone intervene on purpose in order to allow you to destroy your marriage legally, I didn't realize it's also done in other parts of the world, apparently.
Yes, absolutely. I think in honey trapping, there are so many, fault divorce systems that are really very bad for people. I mean, I think they're trying to eradicate the at-fault divorce system in Britain right now. And so there are so many situations that we've put ourselves in that require these outs, as it were, which are very interesting. I mean, the wakaresaseya also they provide any number of services. They can also, I think in Japan, if a company wants to fire someone, they can, shame that person into resigning. They can, they can break up relationships. One of the wakaresaseya agents I spoke to has talked about how he's recently branched out into reuniting people. So, if you miss your high school love and you want to know where they are, go and find them. If they're still single, it's on. So it is quite interesting, and how actually they've he's started to sort of dabble in putting couples together, and of course there is a very robust, sort of traditionally enforced and very well thought of marriage setup industry in Japan as well. So
it's funny when I became a lawyer, basically because my father told me my father was just a frustrated lawyer. He's too old, so the second best thing was to make me become one.
Oh, yes.
I would have been a writer otherwise. And I remember one of my first cases was a divorce when Pennsylvania law still sucks, but it was a true fault divorce. And so the husband and wife had to get together and create this story. So they created this story that on the 4th of July, they were barbecuing, and he got mad at her and threw her right onto the barbecue.
Oh my God.
She burned herself. And I thought,
Jesus.
But that was interesting that the two of them together, that's the story they came up with.
It really is. It says so much. And I mean, also there were, I think in the 1930s, even in war rights, about the hotel divorces in England, where you could hire an actress to be seen entering a hotel with you, and then it would provide you with grounds, with, proof of adultery that one of the spouses could use in the case. So I also, when I read this article, I also immediately thought of War's A Handful of Dust.
Yeah. Yes. I thought of that too. It's funny, it's like, that's so silly, and you go, well, actually, as an author, you think no one could ever make this stuff up. Yes. But then I've been saying that for the past 5 years in the United States, and now it's become such a cliche to me, I can't even say it anymore because it's become a meta kind of thing.
Yes.
You couldn't even make the stuff up that you're making up. It's gone so far beyond that.
Yes. Absolutely. And I think particularly the events of this year, it's extremely surreal.
Yeah, it's surreal. But then when you think about it, it's beyond surreal because it's
beyond surreal because it's real.
If it was surreal, it would be, Fellini or something.
Yes.
It's not Fellini.
It's not Fellini. I know. Absolutely.
Again, talking about myself, when I did that and they made up that story, I thought, this doesn't seem like really something I would like to be doing for the rest of my life. And then the person I was working for, he had a couple in his office and they were signing their will. And he brought the will out to me and he said, could you witness this? And I said, no, I didn't see them sign it. He goes, just witness it. I said, well, no, I didn't see them sign it. He goes, we do this all the time.
Yeah.
And I said, no, I can't. I can't do that. So I thought I was going to get fired, and then I thought I would like to get fired so I don't have to do this anymore.
Oh, wow. Yes, the things we do to get out of professions that we're trapped in. I agree. Yeah.
So last question, since, like I said, a lot of this has been about me. So is manju, is it delicious? Because it sounded delicious.
Yes, it is. And also actually, Azuki sort of red bean paste is my all-time favorite thing. And there's Chinese red bean and Japanese red bean, and my Japanese friends are very certain that the Japanese red bean is superior and more delicate and subtle, and it's wonderful. And I mean, it is very, very good, but I do just love them both, actually. And when I'm in Japan, I always try and find red bean ice cream, and there's a lot of red bean in Singapore. So that is just me being self-indulgent. That's one of the things I absolutely love. Red bean, anything, donuts, ice cream, manju. But by contrast, I hate cheesecake. Hate it.
Well, there's cheese. Well, it's just like manju because there's different kinds, and the same thing with cheesecake. the only kind I like is it's called New York cheesecake.
New York.
I do love that. But there's something about it that doesn't make any it doesn't make any sense as a dessert. But yeah, I do love it, and I love red bean too. Okay, so bottom line. So my bookstore, which is called Wellington Square Bookshop. So the book is on the front table, and we're reopened to a certain extent. And like I said, people love the cover, and
so glad.
I'm touting it as well because I finished it. But yeah, you'll be there, and hopefully someday maybe we'll be able to come over and see us.
Oh, I would absolutely love that. I mean, hopefully next year for paperback we can travel again. I would absolutely adore that. Please do send me a picture of your table. I would love to see the book.
Okay, first of all, you can just go to the website first, and then we'll put this up. Oh yeah, so this will be on YouTube. It'll be on Podomatic. It'll be on iTunes. It'll be on all of our social media. But you've received letters or emails from my producer, but it's just Wellington Square.
Oh, okay.
WellingtonSquareBooks.com.
Brilliant. I will look it up. But thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you.
Likewise. Okay. See you soon. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.